we literally cultivated papaya, like cedar, together, like in harmony with each other. Like we've had so much cultivation and stewardship that when settlers came over, they couldn't even understand that the entirety of what they were seeing wasn't the wild or the wilderness. It's a cultivated, intentional landscape. And so my dad always reminded me growing up, like, everyone holds a piece of the puzzle, and you have to make sure you talk to everyone so you get, all the pieces. Squamish and Skszw's way of being has always been host people. We used to host over 10,000 people every 4 years, all winter, being involved in ceremony, being involved in like my role as someone that's two-spirit. I can be a man, I can be a woman sometimes. I can be more fluid, I can be a channeler, I can be all these things. I didn't experience that. I just experienced being proud of being Native.
Hi, my relatives. On today's podcast, we're joined by Sierra Tasi Baker. Sierra is an entrepreneur, an artist. We talk about so many different things on the podcast. We talk a little bit about their work at Sky Spirit Studio and Consulting, their experience being a dancer, and so much more. So really, I would just love for you to experience it for yourself. So without further ado, please welcome Sierra Tasi Baker.
Hello, my relatives. How are you? Here at Our Storytellers, we care about your spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical well-being, which is why we want to inform you that this podcast discusses topics that may cause trauma to listeners and viewers. These subjects include mentions of Indian residential schools, assimilation, ongoing harm, colonial impacts, and much more. Our Storytellers recognizes the need to minimize risks associated with traumatic subject matter. The Hope for Wellness Helpline offers immediate help to all Indigenous people across Canada. It is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to offer immediate support and crisis intervention. Services are available in English and French, and in Nehiyaw, Anishinaabe and Inuktitut upon request. If you or someone you know are experiencing any harm, no matter how big or small it's perceived to be, you can call the toll-free helpline at 1-855-242-3310 or connect to the online chat at www.hopeforwellness.ca. Kinanaskaman, I'm grateful for you. Your ancestors are always with you. All my relations, Riel.
I love there's just like a curtain and like a secret.
There's two secret
sound
doors.
tech. Oh my god, I love that.
There's one right here.
You're such a Gemini. I can't.
Why? Explain.
Just Gemini's duality, secrets, spilling tea. Like that's your whole thing.
Oh, the read is real. What was I gonna say though? It was important. Whatever, it's gone now.
Making sure that it's like outside or you can travel with it.
Oh yeah, okay.
For like elders.
So like I feel like your story, I don't think we could tell as much as your story here as we could spend 6 hours here. You could tell me everything.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like a person's story is also the land that they grow up in, right?
100%.
Or like their surroundings. That's a big impact. And as a filmmaker, I really consider myself like a filmmaker, like journalist almost. And I think that telling somebody's story in the environment that they're sitting in, like, is so important.
That's so true.
You know?
Yeah.
So for me, the podcast is like it's a great start. We're getting started. We're capturing stories. We're promoting Indigenous businesses, like dub after dub after dub.
Yeah.
At the same time, the stories that I'm going after, I might need to go to.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, you gotta be like around the fire. You gotta get like the audio right somehow. So the crackling's there, but not like the mosquito doesn't fly by.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
We'll do one by a lake in Alberta, and we'll just get attacked.
Oh my god. Yeah. Oh my god, the mosquitoes in Alberta are next level. I've never experienced anything like that in my life.
Have you ever been to Manitoba?
No.
Okay.
Does it just get worse like the further that way you go?
Well, there's a lot of more lakes in Manitoba.
Right.
So keep that in mind.
I know, like in Vancouver, I'm like, oh, I don't like mosquitoes, but they're just like, they're like so lazy. They're just like, they're like us. We're just like, oh, I don't know. There's like salmon over there. It's fine. There's like where it's like in Cree territory. I've never been dive bombed like directly, like arrow to my shoulder. Like, like it's awful. It's like, wow, and you guys just like live with that.
When's the last time you've been back to the prairies?
I think last year around this time, I think.
Yeah.
Like, if I remember correctly. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, during like ceremony season.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of ceremony season, Sierra, my name is Riel. I'm Métis from Nehio and Soto background. My family's from Red River. I'm so thankful to have you here on the podcast. And to get this started, we always start off with, I'm offering like my style of protocol where I'm from. So I'd like to pass over this blanket and tobacco to you just to thank you and to open up those lines of communication and friendship. And I'm so grateful to have you here. So I'm going to pass this over to you.
Don't come and tell me.
Boom. And then please introduce yourself in your own way.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. My name is Tasi Baker. My Kwakwaka'wakw name is esugwilakw. I'm from the Squamish Nation. I'm also Kwakwaka'wakw, Musgamagw Dzawada'enuxw from up north, and I'm also Tlingit from up north as well. My family married down from there's one ancestor from Haida Guy who married into the Tlingit Raven clan that married into the Musgamagw Dzawada'enuxw, and then my grandmother Tḻ'ū married into the Squamish Nation, into the Kwakwaka'wakw family with Chief Dan Baker, my grandpa, and Emily Baker, my grandma. My dad is Wade Baker, and he's on the Indigenous side, and my mom is Mary Tasi from Magyarország, Hungary, Eastern Europe, and my parents both worked together at Sky Spirit Studio, and I grew up in our urban design and planning company, and I've been working in that field since then. I'm also queer. I'm Indigiqueer. I'm two-spirit, gender fluid, and bisexual, and do a lot of work incorporating queerness into our research and what we do. All of my pronouns are they, them publicly, but they, she, he to the friends that know how to be fluid and flow with me.
Yeah. Awesome. Tell us a little bit, like, what's a little bit about your story? How did you grow up? You're a real product of the lands here, it seems like. So I'm super curious about that.
Yeah, I'm like West Coast for sure. I'm really, really grateful. The family I've been born into, like the big Baker clan.
Mm-hmm.
We have like 5,000 plus of us, all up and down the West Coast, cousins everywhere you go. But yeah, I'm really, really grateful. My family did a lot of work. My grandma did a lot of work to ensure that our culture survived, especially throughout the residential school era. And I was able to grow up in my culture and grow up with my first cousins, like all participating in ceremony and getting really connected with our people here. And my mom and my dad have always been really supportive. And also my family are made up of all artists and entrepreneurs and really innovative people. My auntie is Pam Baker. Nicholas, who's a fashion designer, like OG couture, indigenous couturier.
Nice.
And then some of my uncles, like Gigami and Kwakwi and like Cloth Bay, and like all of them, they're all like really renowned artists that do a lot of like contemporary art or like interesting things that hadn't at the time really been done before. So yeah, growing up in like a really innovative, creative, entrepreneurial, supportive family, which just resulted in me also becoming an entrepreneurial, spirited person. My grandpa and my grandma started the RV park right here close by at Sgsmåltjesen by Park Royal. And yeah, like really started that entrepreneurial spirit, I think, for all of us, and inspired us a lot, inspired me a lot. Yeah.
I have a question about that RV park, actually. I read Matthew McConaughey's biography, and apparently he stayed there and loved it.
Really?
Is that true? Have you ever heard about that?
I have no idea. I was like we got to have fun at the RV park era.
Okay, gotcha.
My dad and his uncles or his brothers and all them, they were the like, we have to work hard and build this era.
Right.
And we got to just play in the pool.
Gotcha.
So,
Gotcha.
like not as aware, but yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Something I'm curious about is when you talked about, you grew up in ceremony. What did that look like for you when you were growing up?
Yeah, I'm really in awe of my late grandma, Emily Baker, Tḻ'ū ingit and Magyar. a copper woman. She when she was able to still, I think, have deep roots, and she was a 4 copper chieftain of the Musgamagw Dzawada'enuxw, and she was tasked with this incredible task of making sure our culture survived that whole residential school era, and I would love to say that she did an incredible job, and really upheld those 4 coppers, and eventually, those 4 coppers going to my uncles. Like I don't know if unusual is the right word, but during like times like that, women chiefs or having multiple chieftainships would be bestowed on somebody to help survive it. But that's still considered unusual in terms of like the grand timeline. Normally it would be held by a male chief, and you'd only have one chieftainship. But due to like what we were dealing with colonization, all the epidemics we were dealing with at the time, she had to carry all that forward, and like she did an incredible job of doing so. But yeah, now those roles are kind of back in the right balance. I'm not sure the right wording for all that, but yeah, so growing up witnessing someone like that who is so powerful and held it so well and with so much humility was just really, and like she had so few words too. Like I learned a lot from just like how she breathes, or like how she like her movements, or how she moved her shoulders, and we're all terrified of her side eye, that's for sure.
That's awesome. What is the 4 copper?
And on my Kwakwaka'wakw side, and like I'd love it, if my uncles spoke more to this,
Yeah, sure.
than myself, or my dad. But coppers are these incredible physical items. I guess I'm wearing some coppers right now, but yeah, this is a copper, and a copper shield. It kind of represents, I believe the word is namama. I think if I'm saying that correctly, I'm not sure. I don't speak Kwakwaka'wakw, but it kind of represents the whole proprietary rights of an entire family and lineage, and everything, including their masks, their crests, their stories, their songs, like everything, lands, titles, all of it is shown physically in a copper, and you dance with the copper, and your family upholds the copper, and you can do some incredibly powerful things with a copper. Yeah, and yeah, to be around that throughout my childhood, obviously really spiritually grounding and culturally grounding, at least on my like northern side.
It seems like she was a very powerful woman.
Incredibly. I don't think, yeah, it was just to be able to grow up around like a matriarch like that, and at the time she was getting really fed up with how many of us like needed to get babysat, but eventually our parents like convinced her like, hey, can you babysit all the kids again? So then eventually she started being around all of us all the time, and I honestly don't remember really like talking a lot with her, but I just remember learning a lot from her cadence, like how she took time to think a decision over, how she took time to, never saying like yes right away, or like just really truly processing everything. So I think that taught me a lot. I don't know if I fully embodied it, but every now and then when I like really think about her, I can embody that a lot better, and like have really learned a lot from her. Just, what do you even call that? I don't know, like preciseness, or thoughtfulness. I think thoughtfulness is the word. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And what kind of impact has your dad had on your life?
Oh my God, incredible. My dad's the best dad. I'm so lucky. My dad is just like a wonderful, creative, innovative person. He's always like been the tinkerer, like always creating something wild and strange. He's a master carver. And he's just like a really supportive person. I feel like my parents, obviously they didn't really know I was non-binary growing up, but they felt like they really did raise me non-binary, even though there wasn't the wording or understanding at the time. But my dad taught me how to carve, he taught me how to draw, taught me how to play lacrosse. Like he just was just so excited to just like roll around with me and like go on the res and do resi shit. And then go into the woods and be like, hey, this is licorice root, or like, hey, this is huckleberries, and like, yeah, just doing like the proper like native dad thing. And then yeah, and because of that, I just remember connecting so much on art with him growing up. He taught me Photoshop when I was like 10, I think. because he was like really into Photoshop and technology and like all of it. Yeah, he's been like probably the most supportive person in my entire life around like creativity. And then my mom's like a more project manager archetype, but she is also an artist, so still creative. So then she would kind of be the one to be like, oh, I'm gonna go get the supplies for you guys because you're in your like creative zone right now, or like, oh, here's like snacks so you guys don't get like hyper focused. Like the next 10 hours you guys are grumpy. Like, yeah, so it's always like creating like a good environment. Creating a good environment. And then yeah, my dad always like buying me drawing books or like buying me comic books, and we'd just sit there and we'd copy. I just remember we would like literally sit there and copy like Leonardo da Vinci's drawings together, and he'd copy it in like indigenous style and I'd copy it more like realistic. So my style turned out like more of a hybrid, and then his style has always been really like tradish, but with those like innovative flares. Yeah.
I read online about a story about you and your dad playing cities.
Oh yeah.
Can you tell me that story?
Yeah, actually, I love that we're talking about this because I don't think anybody knows any of this out in the world. But yeah, my dad and I would play Playmobil a lot. Like I loved Playmobil. Anytime I tell Lego people this, they get all like Lego's better or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, I loved Playmobil. And my dad and I would literally spend like an entire day playing Playmobil together. And we'd start with like setting up like the forest, and then we'd go set up like the city, and then we'd go set up like all the services and resources. And like I thought this was playing. Now I do this for work. But then like my favorite part at the end of it is then we destroy the whole thing. And we go and be like, we're monsters, and like and then start all over again the next day.
Yeah.
Which I honestly think taught me really well, and that like don't get precious about things that you make.
Yeah.
So that was good. But yeah, I loved playing cities.
Yeah. I want to
Yeah.
go back to your childhood a little bit, but what do you do for work today? What's
Right.
the whole encompassing?
Yeah, so it's a good segue from playing with cities and destroying them to now I build cities. Yeah, so I'm an urban designer, urban planner. Urban design is my vocation. I've studied environmental design, which is essentially landscape and architecture together with sustainability focus. And then so that was my undergrad. I went to University of British Columbia in Musgamagw to study that. And then I went to University College London Bartlett School of Planning in London, England to study sustainable urbanism, and got my master's in that at 23. And essentially sustainable urbanism is city planning, but with a really strong environmental design and sustainability focus. We also learned a lot about sustainable policy. So I ended up, all of that is kind of called spatial design. So spatial design includes architecture, landscape architecture, urban planning, community planning, engagement, policy, everything that creates our built environment around us. And then also like public art, for example, which I grew up in with my dad and my mom. So I've always been in an interesting position to know a lot about the industry from many angles. It's a lot more normal that somebody be like, go and become an architect, and now they're an architect, or I'm going to be an urban planner and do urban planning. But luckily I have a really wide scope of spatial design. So a lot more of what I do is like redefining industry, redefining how we do things, redefining how people approach urban planning or architecture design, because ultimately it's all really colonial. And ultimately a lot of it results in a lot of the racism we deal with in the city and how cities are built. They can really enforce colonialism. So a lot of what I'm trying to do is deconstruct that and renegotiate with people in these industries how they do things. Yeah.
How do cities enforce colonialism?
Oh, there literally are colonialism from the get-go. But in Vancouver, for example, so for example, in 1850, when the first settlers came over here, it's called annexed the whole city. So they drew on maps and they cut up the city into blocks, and all those blocks turned into streets and roads and all these things. And they paved over our traditional Indigenous pathways, for example. And they paved over all of our mud flats. They scooped out all of our clam gardens. They, like so on and so forth, like all of this colonial violence and harm that they've done to the land. And it was all in the name of being more civilized and believing that this is the best way to build things or create a city or create a community. on lands. Meanwhile, like we've been designing for thousands of years our own territories. We literally cultivated Sḳwx, like cedar, together, like in harmony with each other. Like we've had so much cultivation and stewardship that when settlers came over, they couldn't even understand that the entirety of what they were seeing wasn't the wild or the wilderness. It's a cultivated, intentional landscape that we live in or in harmony with. So essentially, all that results in something called redlining. So redlining is when, especially in urban planning, for example, the downtown east side was identified and pointed out on the map as somewhere where Black, Indigenous, and people of color would be put. And then, for example, people were not allowed, Black, Indigenous people of color were not allowed to buy land in the West End of like waterfront area, or like you can't buy any land in Shaughnessy, or like all these things. So redlining was intentionally creating areas of poverty to put BIPOC people and intentionally creating areas of wealth and status for white people. So that's redlining, and that's intentional, and that's why the city is the way it is. And those reflect in health. Like, for example, places that are intentionally created to be places of poverty, they have less trees. Less trees means during heat waves that more people might die of strokes, like things like this. Like it just keeps going and affects our daily lives. Yeah.
What is something like that you would change if you could redesign all of Vancouver today? Like what do you think is kind of missing from the balance right now?
Indigenous sovereignty. 100%. Yeah, I mean, I ask myself that question all the time, and I wish I could do the whole just like dinosaur, like knock everything over.
Yeah, back to Lego.
Totally.
Oh no, sorry, not Lego.
Playmobil.
Yeah.
And then and just actually play as well in a way. Like all of this is really serious, obviously. Like all of this is a really serious undertaking. It affects real lives. It affects our everyday lives. But reincorporating like joy and play, fullness, kinship, relationship building, all that I think is missing as well. But specifically, obviously, Indigenous sovereignty. A lot of the projects I've been working on with like City of Vancouver or Park Board are really difficult to navigate because the power dynamics are inherently just off. They're colonial entities occupying Indigenous territory. Whereas now I'm really fortunate I'm able to work on projects with my own nation, the Squamish Nation. Like MSC Development Corps just started up, which is all three nations working together to develop on our own lands. But yeah, working with my own nation as my own client for the first time. And you're like, oh, the power dynamic makes a lot more sense here. Obviously, being very aware of like community needs and band needs and, all the overlaying politics is its own thing. But at least it's like, oh, this makes more sense now.
Yeah.
And that's really cool that that's happening.
Yeah.
And that's just because sovereignty is, the dynamic is working. It's closer to sovereignty than it is to like oppression, essentially.
If you could design one thing, like your goal thing, your Sydney Opera House, let's say, what would it be?
Oh my gosh. Because I'm more of an urban environmental designer, I would absolutely, like, I've been really focusing on, especially with a lot of the projects we're working on, the intertidal and foreshore areas. So all the beach areas, all the ocean fronts and across our whole territory. And we were creating, it's called a methodology or like a way of designing that's new and different. It's not new, it's like literally just ancestral, but like new to whiteness and colonialism. But like reincorporating, and redesigning and remediating all of those areas and bringing back all the Coast Salish land management techniques that we've used for centuries, like using crushed seashells to stabilize the soil, using eelgrass to mitigate the waves crashing in and bring back salmon habitat, bringing back all the canoe landings, bringing back our longhouses, bringing back our like summer cattail mat structures that we would just like, like all summer we would just hang out on the beach and like it would just felt so beautiful. Bringing back all the like the glowing technology we had. Like we have all these incredible like glowing seashells or like glowing creatures or glowing called Tŭ, like a special kind of diatomaceous earth or clay that we would use to help make things glow under moonlight. And then we had this whole moonlight life back in our Coast Salish fully like before 1850 days. And like I'd love to bring back that like nightlife again. Like the Coast Salish way of being is just like glowing and glittering and just like thriving and moisturized. It's a good time, right? Like I want to bring that back.
Yeah.
So it's more of like a land approach, I think.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. What was going to school in the UK like for you?
Oh my gosh. It like completely wild. Like I wasn't expecting to like enjoy it as much as I did. I think being that close to the heart of colonialism and having more proximity to access the truth of things really helped me in my journey to understanding how to decolonize, spatial design, how to decolonize cities. And, when you're right there at the British Museum, you're right there in the archives, you're right there at the Greenwich Museum studying in the archives, you're right there at all these places that have intentionally inflicted colonial harm. And then you're starting to unpack how those systems operate. And then after all that, you're like, okay, I understand how the system works now. It's a flawed system inherently, but it really plays on like divide and conquer. It really plays on, just like disconnecting people from each other. I'm like, oh, okay, wait, if I can understand that, divide and conquer, let's go towards, what Audre Lorde said, which I think is define and empower is what Audre Lorde said. Or like, okay, if I want to go towards unpacking this whole greed thing, we go towards like relationship building. If I want to, you're like, okay, the solutions are becoming way easier to understand and look at. And our ancestors have always been excellent at those solutions. So just re-employing them and, feeling like you have a foothold in this. It doesn't feel as hopeless and it doesn't feel, like colonialism is just this like thing breathing down our neck. It's like, wait, I understand what this beast is now. And I can do what I need to do to create some more space for like our worldview to come back again.
That is super interesting. That is super interesting because I feel like that would not, like if I had to guess, that probably wouldn't have been my guess of your experience going there, right? But no, that's super interesting. So it sounds like to me, and please, for Lord's sake, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like to me that, part of your design is really reinstating that balance, between how a human was to use the land versus and keep maintaining that balance without destroying things, If I had to take a colonial perspective, like if I like thinking of your past clientele, what would be those common excuses for not engaging in that kind of way of design? I feel like for me, if I had to guess, it would be like, that's too expensive. We can't employ these new technologies. We can't do something like that. Am I on the right path? Or?
Oh, totally. Well, actually, it's way more politics is really the main thing. Like, where do I even begin? It's every single day there's an excuse. Every single day there is something. Just they're like, oh, this is too radical, and you're like, yeah, like, obviously. But I think something I've been dealing with is divide and conquer really badly. Like, city of Vancouver, really, I think thinks right now, some of them are working on it, some of them aren't. But like they really feel like communities are separate and apart from each other. They don't talk to each other. They don't have solidarity with each other. That's why I do so much work with like different Black designers or community leaders on solidarity, understanding these different technologies to address colonialism. But, there really is like siloed, like, oh, the Black community's over here, the Chinese community's over here, the Indigenous communities over here, the host nation communities over here, right? Like urban Indig, host nation, the 3 host nations, divide and conquer, its own, long story with that too, right? But because of this thinking from the city of Vancouver and because the power dynamic is still off, right? Like it's still an occupying force in our territory. They still hold the power in a lot of ways. And same with Park Board, its own entity. Because of that, there's not, it's like, oh, when we engage these communities to see what do we want designed, what solutions do we want here, they're engaging them siloed, which in some ways is important, but I think that's more when community advocates are involved, not when the city is doing its own thing. But it's like, why not having conversations with each other? Why not having conversations in good relationship with each other?
Mm.
Like, we're all live here. We're all on MST territory. Like, we should be talking to each other. And ultimately, like Musgamagw Squamish and Sďwx way of being has always been host people, right? Like, we used to host over 10,000 people every 4 years, all winter. And like, just to, support creativity, support, relationship building, community. We would trade, all the way to the Hawaiian Islands, all the way into Cree territory. We would trade up and down the West Coast. We had trade routes all the way down into Incan and Mayan and Aztec territory. We'd follow the monarch butterflies. Like, we've always been a very multicultural culture.
Totally.
So, like, why would, pitting people against each other, creating hierarchies between communities, like classic divide and conquer stuff, even unintentionally and some of it intentionally. But like, why wouldn't, if you did, host nation as host people, restore that dynamic, restore that sovereignty, why wouldn't that ultimately benefit and be a better design process for BIPOC people in general, and ultimately white people? I think if they could just like get a little less afraid of all this and like, not be so worried that we'll, act the way that they're acting when we have power, because the way we've always held power has always been with kindness and softness and making sure everyone's fed and taken care of. How like colonialism has held power has been violent and harmful, and they're worried that if we hold power we'll just be the same, which is not true. So it's like, well, when we actually hold our sovereignty, we're out here to feed everyone. We're out here to like go to the beach. We're out here to like, have a good fishing day. Like, like, why can't we just do that? And ultimately, I feel like as a general human experience, everyone would really enjoy that. So
absolutely. Well, it's 100% going to be, it would be better for everybody, like in so many different outcomes, probably health wise, honestly, probably financially in the long term, definitely environment wise, 100%.
Yeah.
So it's like, the one thing that we can't deny is, no offense, Vancouver, but the city is designed like shit. And like everywhere is designed like shit.
Awful.
Like I don't know if you
so
ever
much concrete.
I don't know, so much concrete.
Yeah.
But it's also like operations wise it's designed like shit. Like, have you tried to drive anywhere?
I don't drive for that reason.
Exactly. And nobody does here because it's impossible. It's also bad for the environment sometimes too. But like that's one thing that I think like can't be denied. And what I'm so confused about is like why we're so afraid to try something new.
That's so true. Yeah.
And it just doesn't, like, something just doesn't click up for me. But it is what you said. It's the power dynamics and their way of holding power in comparison to our way of holding power. Like, if I was to be like an influential man in my community, that literally means how much I can possibly give to my community.
Yeah.
That's how you're regarded. That's how you're rewarded. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And then it's also inherently like, I find it just to be like inherently.
Yeah. It feels
rewarding.
good for your spirit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. You might have already answered this question, but I am curious. We can always edit out if that's a repeat. But what is ecological design?
Right. So environmental design.
Yeah.
I know all these words and semantics are honestly a whole thing. Like English does a huge disservice, whereas like our people were just like, that's just what it is.
Yeah, exactly.
Our people have been doing, I think ecological is like slightly different than environmental, but I'll address like environmental design, which is what I do and what I've studied. But environmental design is, design comes from the word designate. Yeah. Essentially, you're just designating where things go. But from this like kind of urban planning perspective, environmental design is designing the land. So things that you can do as an environmental designer includes working with things like bioswales or rain gardens to change how water moves across of a site. It's called stormwater management. You can influence whether or not a landscape will succumb to an earthquake or a landslide. You can influence how well ecological biodiversity is performing on a site. You can essentially all factors towards nature or the environment and all of the technologies, traditional ecological knowledges, like all that inherent in them, you can shift those factors from a project perspective. There's a lot of words for like technically a really simple concept, which is just working with the land.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, that's what kind of like confused me a little bit is as I was researching to prepare for you, like there are so many lanes you can go down
Yeah.
for this type of thing. But that's probably also what makes it kind of an engaging career
Oh, entirely.
at the same time, right?
Yeah.
How do you incorporate the stories of the land when you're designing?
I love working with our legends and oral histories. I think I'm really fortunate I got to grow up with a lot of our legends, and my dad's an oral historian, and my dad told me stories about when he was a little kid, he used to go hang out in the sweat lodge that Chief Catslano and them would have right around here in Humboldt, I believe.
Mm.
And he just liked hanging out in there because it was like warm, it like warmed a cooling off thing after a sweat. And he would just sit there and listen to stories from Catslanoch and like our other elders. And he heard all like the little stories that didn't get recorded, like things like the trading routes or things like funny stories that would happen out in the woods, just like the little things that don't get put into the legends so much, or the origin stories, or like the larger community tales and epics. He got like kind of those little pieces. And so my dad always reminded me growing up, like, everyone holds a piece of the puzzle, and you have to make sure you talk to everyone so you get, all the pieces. And ultimately, you're just part of those pieces as well. And that's being in community. So I always really, really love storytelling. And, growing up with storytellers. And that really resulted in, when I went to London, England, realizing we need to design differently because design is often inherently colonial when it comes from the Western education system. But Indigenous design is inherently storied. It inherently has storytelling in it. It has these storytelling technologies. So I started working with that, and I created what's called a methodology, or like a way of designing, that I call etiological design. So etiology coming from etymology, or like the origin of things. So like etiological stories are like origin stories, like Zunaqua, like where did mosquitoes come from kind of thing, or origin stories of like the Great Flood, like where did, these markings on the mountain come from, or these origin stories. So then working with origin, or origin as a concept, even in a way that works with the cadence of storytelling and the cadence of community engagement. Therefore, like, how do you talk to elders? How do you talk to people around you? What is a legend? What is a story? My my cousins, like, I won a lacrosse game and this is how it goes. Like, that's an origin story, right? You can work with that into a design. So yeah, as an example, right, with lacrosse, right, you can actually like look at the lacrosse stick, you can look at the game, you can look at the research, the origin of the game, and then you can start being like, oh wow, like, originally, I think, is it willow that's used in the lacrosse stick?
I have no idea.
I'm not.
I just played it.
Yeah. I just, well, like, whatever like that bark is, you could be like, oh, let's use that in the material design of the building.
Nice.
Or look at how these how it's sewn together, or like woven. Let's work with that weaving technique, put it in the building. Or like, oh, look at like the shape or the curvature of this. Let's look at all these things. Let's put that into the landscape, right? Like, there's so many ways you can spatially bring story and shape and spatial like understanding of storytelling back into the landscape.
Yeah.
That's just like one example.
I think that is so unbelievably freaking interesting and so important, because when you walk into a building and you just kind of immediately feel like lost or something like that, or you just kind of feel like, where am I going, stuff like that. The story I'm telling myself right now is that if you were to include story into that, it eliminates that feeling as you're walking into a building or into a garden or into whatever that kind of thing looks like. And I think that that's so much more important. I think that's what's missing from this shitty ass town.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is like belonging.
Yeah.
Like walking into a space and you're like, oh, I belong here.
Yeah.
Yeah, whereas you walk into, a colonially designed building, it's like right angles, fluorescent lighting, concrete. You're like, this is literally attacking me. Like, I can hear the lights, like I can hear this space. Like, this space just doesn't feel good to exist in.
Yeah.
And then you realize that was intentionally designed that way. They don't want you to spend time in a lobby, right? They want you to keep walking.
Wow. I didn't even thought about that.
Yeah. And that's like, whereas like, that's so against our culture. Like, our culture is like, no, come, like, have tea. Like, come, like, you'd want to design it immediately differently. Like, you'd want warm lighting. You'd want fresh air. You'd want, like, all these things. You want a kitchen close by.
Yeah.
in case an elder needs like to sit for a minute before their meeting and like have tea, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, you immediately start thinking differently about it.
Okay. My little business brain is flying out the window right now with a bunch of ideas.
Yeah.
What is it? What piece of work that you've done are you most proud of?
Oh my goodness. That's a
Probably
it's
a hard question. It's probably like picking one of your kids, but you know what I mean?
well, in a lot of ways, none of these projects are finished.
Yeah.
You know, like a lot of these projects are mid-process. A lot of the projects I'm involved in are like 20-year timelines. Like you need to, involve the whole community. You need to talk to everyone. You need to listen. You need to go back, revise what you're doing. Like you're never, you're never like it's done. Like this doesn't make sense to say that in a community context. So everything I'm working on right now is like mid-process. A lot of these projects I started as soon as I got back from London, England, about like 5 years ago, is when I started this work fully back in this territory. And since then, all of those projects are still ongoing, right? But if I want to say anything that I'm really proud of, I think it's the like solidarity building work that we've been doing with like the Black and Indigenous Design Collective. I'm really proud of the methodology work we've been doing, like how to do this design work, how to approach design decolonially. I think some of the policy work we've been doing. So we don't just work on projects, but we're trying to influence policy around how the industry is run, right? So helping policymakers be like, oh, like you have to work with Indigenous people on Indigenous land, obviously, but that's not obvious, right, to how things are done. And, really changing the narrative, really changing how people do things. When I first started 5 years ago, nobody did, land acknowledgements before design meetings. And you're like, but you're working directly with the land. And that's crazy. And like all these designers, there are less than 1% of Indigenous designers, Black and Indigenous actually, like together, less than 1% of Black and Indigenous designers in so-called Canada, like working in the design fields. That's insane. But like it's all our land, like it's all Indigenous land. Like, and then like, yeah. And then you look at those statistics and 60% is majority white people working in the field. Majority of those people are white men. Majority of those people are white, cisgendered, heterosexual men. And you're like, that's great. I love that for you. But you keep designing cities for people like that are so uncomfortable. Like, can we just relax?
Yeah.
Like...
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I guess you're addressing, I saw that post on your story, I think, and you're addressing that through your work with the Black and Indigenous Design Collective. What's the story behind the foundation of the Black and Indigenous Design Collective?
Oh God, I love that. I'll tell you the real story.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So the real story is I was on a design meeting for one of these projects a couple years ago, and it was a sea of white people and one incredible Black woman. And I was like, I have to figure out who this is. Like, it's just like me and this like Black girl just like in this room full of white people trying to like change things. So immediately I'm like, okay, I'm going to look them up online. And their name's Divine and Demier. I'm like, okay. And I message them immediately in the meeting. And Divine's really bad at hiding her facial expressions on Zoom. So she started like smirking and then had to like turn off her camera. And I was like, hey, like, oh my God, what do you do? Who are you? Like, this is amazing. Like, we're never in these spaces. Like, who are you? Let's work together. And they're like, oh, I'm a landscape architect. I do all this incredible work. I'm Indigenous to Burundi, East Africa. And then that immediately, like, I hadn't really done a lot of work yet to be like, oh yeah, like there's obviously Indigenous people in Africa. Like, I've just been so miseducated here. And I was like, of course, that makes like I can't even. But yeah. So then learning about
we all
that,
have moments like that.
Oh my God. And then and then like really like asking her real questions, having those real cultural exchanges, and us being like, wow, like there's not enough of us here. Clearly, like we're in all these meetings together all the time, and people don't look like us. People aren't thinking, decolonially. People aren't thinking even like just somewhat radically. Like, can we just push this further? Can we just, get uncomfortable a bit more? And then working a lot with Divine, learning more about Burundi culture, learning more about how similar it is to Coast Salish culture. We have extremely similar art forms, learning about like global indigeneity just through talking to each other. And then Divine got a grant, like a small scale grant to maybe do some work. And then, we were like, hey, instead of a project, let's start a nonprofit to address these things that we're talking about, address how few of us are in these fields. And we did that, and we brought on a bunch of other people into the collective, like Crystal Paribu, who's this incredible, decolonial public artist that works in the public art realm. And we've just all been working together really hard on solidarity mainly, and realizing like how truly difficult solidarity is. I think, it sounds great on paper, but when you're actually like there, like shoulder to shoulder doing work together, you really realize like, oh, like this is real, this is relationship building. And then what does that look like in design, in the spatial design realm? Like, what does that look like as a host nation person hosting, stolen bodies on stolen land? How do you, navigate host nation power dynamics with, displaced people in our territories? And how do you support each other? And how do you do work together? How do you tell the story of colonialism from the start to finish, right? Like, because it went to Africa first. Well, actually, it went to Europe first. They lost their own, ancestral knowledge and all the rest of it. Then through like the Doctrine of Discovery, Romanus Pontifex, Antikythera, Dum Diversas, like all these like papal Vatican policies and paperwork, just paper. I call them paper people at this point. It's just all just paper is just causing all these like evils that have like created this backbone for a lot of what's happening to us. And then, yeah, all that went to Africa. The slave trade that went over to South America came up to North America. And then colonialism only really reached like our shores here, I think about in 1791. I'm so bad at math. I don't know how long ago that was, but like 300 maybe years ago.
I mean, maybe 200, maybe even less.
Yeah. So like not
1970,
long.
so 100. So you're at 150-ish.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wow, that's like not...
150 years of amalgamation or something like that. Or 100 years of amalgamation. What is?
Yeah, that was 1923.
Yeah. So then it would have been... Yeah. Anyway, doesn't matter. Not that long ago. And just so everyone knows, by the time that they got here, they were freaking good at it too.
So good at it.
Like
they knew exactly what they're doing.
They were so good at making sure that the people had access to nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Entirely. And then like you think about it, like the Philippines has been dealing with colonization for like 1,500 years.
Oh yeah.
Unreal. And then we've been dealing with it, across Turtle Island for 500. Only about, if somebody can do the math, put it on the screen, edit on the screen, right here, this long ago.
Oh, it's going on. It's going in there now.
Yeah. This long ago is when colonization affected us and came to our shores, which was not long ago at all.
Yeah.
And I think like in the grand context, it's like I'm still connected to culture. There's only one generation between me and a traditional lifestyle. But if you think about it, there's like 7 generations more in other parts of the world that have had that interrupt, have had that displacement and dispossession. But then you really tap in and you're like, wait, like this global indigeneity that's been affected by colonization, let's talk to each other. Let's go to the Philippines, ask them like, hey, like, how are you doing? Are you okay? Like, what are the tools working for you, not working for you? Going to like the incredible movements like Black Lives Matter, Black Panthers, the Black Panthers working with AIM, the American Indian movement. Like, what are these moments of solidarity between our communities of like, figuring this out? Like, hey, like you figured out, like, for example, like Afrofuturism is such an incredibly beautiful tool for addressing colonialism and like all these colonial harms.
What is that?
Afrofuturism is created for and by Black people to imagine themselves in the future, right? Like colonialism doesn't want us in the future, doesn't want BIPOC people to have futures. So it's about like putting Blackness in a sci-fi, but not even just that. It's like about ancestral stuff too. It's like, what is my future? I want to define my own future, all those things. So then, like, as Black communities in conversation with Indigenous communities, it's like, let's talk about futurism. Let's understand that together. Like, when I imagine my future, you're in it too, right? Like, that's solidarity building through futurism. But yeah, like having these conversations with each other of like, what tools are working for you? And then inviting them into like our culture too and being like, this is what's working for us. And just like having those cross-cultural like relationship building exchanges are so important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's crazy how you can just relationship build your way out of problems that probably shouldn't exist, but whatever, we'll leave it at that for sure.
Yeah.
You know, let's take it back to your business at this moment in time. How did Sky Spirit Studio and Consulting start?
So should I tell you the real story again?
Yeah. Yeah, let's leak everything.
Yeah. The real story is my mom, who was an old school urban planner, in her words, came from the East Coast. So my Hungarian side, like my Hungarian ancestors, my grandparents, my Hungarian grandparents escaped Hungary in 1956 during the Hungarian Revolution. They went over to London as refugees and then eventually moved into Canada. My mom had a whole life in Toronto, and she had that very classic like white woman, like girl boss, but before it was like still extremely misogynistic, still
Mhm.
like white men rule everything, cigars in the back room
Right,
kind of
like-
energy.
Like, where's your skirt?
Yeah,
style.
totally.
Yeah.
And my mom even showed me, she saved pamphlets from conferences that told them exactly what to wear, how to speak, like what to eat, like,
What?
yeah, how to drink your wine, like stuff like that. Like, yeah, just like very like that era.
Yeah.
And my mom, even, despite all that, ended up made her own urban planning company. So one of the few females in her, in charge of her own company at the time, but still like not really introduced to like, indigeneity yet, like didn't really understand any of that, didn't understand like how Canada is an occupation and all the rest of it. But like she slowly was like, oh, something about this doesn't feel right to me. So she started doing her own like work to go and like educate herself of like why something felt so wrong. And then realized that like that whole lifestyle just like wasn't okay anymore. And she just left it behind, just like picked a place on a map, went to Vancouver, suddenly was in Vancouver, like didn't, left behind her business, left behind her life, left behind like everything. And just came to Vancouver and then met my dad at a bar on Hastings where she really liked his cowboy boots.
Nice.
Apparently, is the story. And they danced the night away and like fell like super head over heels in love with each other. And both of them didn't think they could have kids, so I just like showed up out of nowhere. And they're like, oh. And then they got married. And I was at their wedding, like cute little baby, like, hey.
Creator sent you.
Yeah. Like, this is what we're up to now. And my dad's like this incredible public artist, carver, right? And my mom was like, okay, like I need a lifestyle change. Maybe I can just support his business and I can support him as like a project manager. And then so they started, it was originally Sky Serpent Studio, hence all the snakes.
Mm-hmm.
Sky Serpent Studio, changed the name to Sky Spirit Studio. And yeah, essentially when I was born, they started this company together to, support a more free and entrepreneurial lifestyle that I'm really fortunate I got to grow up in. And they're still together 30 years later, or 28 years later. And yeah, my mom kept all of her urban planning certifications up to date, all of just everything needed for all the urban planning stuff. And my dad like really understands spatial design really well and have always been really interested in what's called placemaking. So public art that's just not like plopped somewhere, but public art that both of them started getting into like, what if I put a bench around it? What if I make a space for this? What if it becomes more of like a whole it becomes a space.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I eventually came back from London, England, I came back and I was like, okay, like how ready are both of you for getting back into urban planning? And both of them were like, yeah, I think we're ready to like really get back into this. And ever since then, we've all been working together really solidly on all these projects for the past 5 years.
Amazing. Family business.
Yeah.
Hi, my relatives. Thank you so much for watching and listening. If you have any feedback, please comment on YouTube or submit feedback through Spotify. All of your feedback helps us make this production so much better. So thank you so, so much. And back to your podcast. I think it's safe to say that you're kind of like objectively a badass. Okay? So what about your achievements so far bring you the most pride? Or what about your story brings you the most pride?
Oh, wow. Those are very different
You can answer both.
answers.
Let's go achievement first then.
Achievement. Okay. Well, I obviously like really recognize my privilege. Like I'm really fortunate. I'm an only child. My parents, have been always incredibly supportive. We have a wonderful relationship. We are all really good at working together. We love working together. We're all really good at, our flow with each other. So I think like in terms of achievement, I think just the fact that we're really trying to decolonize and really trying to implement it. And I'm really proud of all the people that I work with, like Divine and Demier, Crystal, Pataru, Nathan Mudge, different people all over the city doing this decolonial work. And yeah, I'm just really proud of those relationships. And so much of decolonizing is doing it in a good way. So I think I'm just really proud of like us like actually really trying to take the time, like really like, hey, something didn't work, let's take a week, and like being able to actually take that week and rethink things or figure out how to do things differently, to the point where we're having almost like the way we work is an experiment, like an active experiment of like, how do you live a life? How do you support each other? How do you support a family? How do you support people around you? How do we build a business that, feels good for people to work in? Let's just go take this meeting at a beach. We don't have to be in an office right now. Let's take off, like writing down death dates and trauma dates is important. Like just don't work, when you're grieving, right? Like taking time off for community, like taking time off to be in community. Really practicing those things and seeing the value in those things and supporting each other in those things. I think I'm really proud of that. And that it at this point, in the past, well, I guess my whole life in a way, but like especially the past 5 years, really trying to implement, really trying to, do the work in a way that feels good and like is restful, because this is really hard work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think also like what is probably misunderstood is that if you don't strike that balance, your product is not as good.
No, especially when you're doing Indigenous work. Like how much of this work is like, being in conversation with an elder. You don't rush an elder, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't put an elder in like a square room with fluorescent lights and you're like, okay, go. Like, like
I do. Yeah, unfortunately I do, but yeah.
It's okay. You can now use etiological design.
Yeah, I'm gonna need to etiological design this whole place. To be honest with you.
Yeah, that'd be great. But yeah, like, like you, especially working with Indigenous people and like with ancestral knowledge, like you have to do it differently. Otherwise, like, our elders are literally taught to just like play tricks, right? Like luckily we have trickster energy in our cultures. Because it's like, yeah, if like, somebody's rushing a deadline too much, you're like, oh, I'm just going to play tricks now.
Have you ever watched an elder meme a non-Indigenous person, like right to their face?
Yes.
Do you have a good story about it?
I don't think I can tell it.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. Just so that everybody knows, though, is that when it happens, it's hilarious
It's
to
so
watch
good.
it. Yeah. One time, I just saw this TikTok or something like that, and there was this guy that was like saying like his grandfather like got up on stage and he was speaking his language, and in the language it translated something to like I'm so humble to be here. I'm just a human. I'm here to speak my story. I come here humbly, whatever. And then like he switches to English. He's like, "You're also lucky to have me here. It's great to be here. I'm here to tell you everything that I know." Like just like stuff like that, just like full switch over. I just love those stories so much.
Oh wait, no, I do have a story.
Okay.
I guess my dad's an elder now. I don't think of him as an elder.
Yeah.
But he's totally an elder now. And yeah, I think my favorite one is Dad'll just like fall asleep on Zoom meetings sometimes.
Yes.
Just like full, like, and he does the whole like,
oh, the old man?
Yeah. Like, yeah.
This one?
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, exactly that one. And
their head's partially held up.
Yeah. That's perfect. you got that. But yeah, he does the old man, back. Every now and then a little snarl come out. And I was like, Dad, like, you're just like, can you, like, we're in a meeting. And then he told me one day, he's like, in our culture, I actually don't know if this is like a trick at all, actually, but it might be entirely true. But he's like, in our culture, it's a sign of deep respect if you fall asleep listening to somebody because you're listening with your spirit.
Oh, I hope that's true.
Yeah. So you know what? Fair. So now that's like a teaching I give like everyone. Like if you need to fall asleep, it's fine. You're just listening with your spirit, and everyone's like, "Wow, wisdom."
Wisdom.
Yeah.
I think that the colonial world doesn't recognize naps as much as they should.
100%.
Naps are
Yeah.
totally natural,
Yeah.
the best,
Yeah.
and complete. If you care about me working hard, you'd let me have a half an hour nap.
Literally.
Just saying.
Yeah. Like, how else am I supposed to get the spirit world like okay on this?
Totally. Yeah. No, I gotta go
Yeah.
somewhere and come back so I
Yeah.
can be refreshed and have new ideas for you
100%.
that you're not paying me for. But whatever.
Yeah.
I think that one thing that we haven't touched on yet so far is you're actually a dancer.
Yeah.
When did you get into dance?
Well, dancing, I used to be really into sports and then went into dancing when I was 12. I started with, I think, a jazz class at One Dance Creative Arts Center in North Vancouver. I guess dance has obviously always been a part of my life, luckily, with like through ceremony. But I really needed an emotional outlet, like something. I'm clearly someone very in my head. I really needed something to help me like embody things and just like stop thinking. And found that dance was really powerful for me. It was or has been an incredible tool for storytelling. Um, I have a hard time. I know it's like very inobvious, but I have a hard time articulating how I feel, and have had a hard time with that since I was little. So I get really frustrated and upset and like flustered, and I couldn't speak anymore when I was a kid. So my parents, that's how I got into art. Actually, my parents were like, "Here, like just draw how you feel," and eventually that turned into like, "Well, show us how you feel." And then I was just sitting there interpretive dancing like anger. And my parents were like, yeah, totally. But it felt good. I felt heard somehow. And yeah, that translated into choreography. Susan Heimsoth was my dance teacher, and she really taught a choreography or like activism through choreography based thinking. Like you can, work with rage. You don't have to look pretty. Like you can work with like feelings that we don't talk about. You can work with um, you can work with your trauma. You can dance through that. And she had a really trauma based approach to dancing about like moving energy through your body and healing through somatics and yeah, like processing emotions with your body. And that worked really, really well for me. And yeah, I became really invested, ended up in lots of like traveling for it. And then eventually when I was, I think 16, I met a bunch of circus people at fire performing on a beach and got really into fire performing and circus arts and loved it and started incorporating the same concepts with it's called prop manipulation. So like I really like contact staff it's called, or fire fans, or like dragon staff, like all these different things that you can play with. I guess play is an important part of my life. I'm realizing in this conversation. But yeah, I spent 2 years training with different circus people, like local circus artists in Vancouver at Sideshow Studios, it was originally called. But then due to, I believe, gentrification, that got shut down. And the whole community was like, oh no, what do we do now? But yeah, eventually started performing professionally for a really long time. And I stopped fire performing past 2 years, but I've still been dancing. And I'm really grateful because there was a point in my life where I was going to either decide to become a professional choreographer for the rest of my life or a designer. And I realized that I wanted to become a designer because I think I could still be a dancer. And I'm really glad I thought that because it's true. And now I'm both. And so my day life is all the work we've just been talking about, like design and architecture. And then my nightlife is all like trying to like process emotions and like embody that work and like move trauma through my body because what we do is really intense. But then being able to do that in community still and, dancing through it or bringing those things up in conversation with like multiple people or multiple dancers.
I've actually I've never really experienced like dance in that way, so it's a little bit
Right.
difficult for me to like completely understand, but I could definitely see it.
Yeah.
And then, so one thing is that if you Google your name, there's a lot of videos of you dancing online. You know, I think that you started off dancing kind of those like like those traditional, like what you could learn in a dance school. You
Mhm.
start off dancing that way, and then if you watch you dance now,
Yeah.
you'll notice that, well, at least I think that I notice that you blend in your indigeneity into your dance quite well
Thank you.
at the same time. What was that journey like, if that's a good question?
Yeah, thank you.
What?
Yeah, I don't get to talk about dance as much anymore. I'm always talking about design, so it's really nice to like talk about dancing again.
Well, go off.
Yeah.
You can even start dancing if you
Oh my
like.
god, let's go. I could teach you the whole somatic thing later too. But yeah, I obviously, yeah, I started with jazz and then needed better technique. They're like, your technique's off. I was like, okay.
Mhm.
And then, yeah, I went into ballet. Really liked the discipline of ballet, but it does teach a lot of like body dysmorphia. Like there's a whole dark side to dance world that can be really difficult. Although one dance, the dance school I was going to was like really trying to address that and create a safe environment for that. So it was really nice to go in that environment.
Mhm.
But there are other dance schools that you know, have a lot of body dysmorphia issues, eating disorders, like all the rest of it. But yeah, so there's that really like technical kind of darker side of the dance world that it was interesting to experience that. But then my choreographer kind of pulled me out of that and I was like, I think you'd prefer contemporary dance. And I was like, oh, okay, why? And they're like, it's more free form, it's more about storytelling. And then we started working together. And at that point, I was getting good enough to compete as a solo artist. And that's when our first solo choreography we developed together was a Raven transformation dance. So then we started that process. And then transformation became this like huge part of how I dance. And, you know, like mimicking ravens. And like
Mhm.
that's part of our culture, right? Like mimicking these animals, learning how they sound, learning how to like what, you know, literally channel them. So
Mhm.
then learning how to be a channeler through movement and dancing, which I think is quite traditional
Mhm.
as well. And then, yeah, and then really working with Raven energy through a lot of my dances after that. And yeah, becoming really connected to the enjoyment of channeling those different energies. And then I started working with our legends of like Zunakwa and then created a wild woman dance that was more of a contemporary approach. I worked with like a grizzly and bear legend, which is about two women that are having a really hard time with each other. And
What's the legend?
oh god, I don't think I can say it
Okay.
here, but
Yeah.
the you know, cliff notes, I
Yeah,
guess,
yeah, yeah.
are they're both married to one man and there's a lot of jealousy between them, but a lot of it is like unhealthy and it could have, you know, I think been addressed and all the rest of it, and then it results in a Game of Thrones level tragedy at the end. And I think it really speaks to a lot of themes of like misogyny and um you know, like also forgiveness and healing, like all these incredible things, and then actually dancing with it and like working with it as a healing piece. You know, working through relational trauma. Unfortunately, I have had PTSD since I was 16 years old. So like really using dance, but then also working with our legends, and then realizing that our legends are these incredible healing tools. And then if you're embodying, you know, those teachings to the best of your ability, or even in your own way, that there's a level of healing that you can access through that. So then, yeah, like really working with dance and our legends and, you know, our creatures in a way. Like West Coast is very about our creatures.
Mhm.
So yeah, working and channeling and like learning how to be in relationship, I guess, in a way with the spirit world that way. And then also be in relation with like, you know, coming to the spirit world with like, this is the healing I'm asking for help with and want help channeling with. And then I want to move and embody and, you know, offer space on this stage or this space or this forest that I'm moving in, to share space with me and like talk with me and channel and heal ideally. Or at the very least just be in relationship. Like being close to culture is healing on its own. So yeah, I felt really supported again. I'm really grateful for how much support I've had in my life. But yeah, I felt really supported by my choreographer to like do that process.
Mhm.
And then eventually really felt like I could go out on my own and started creating my own choreography and started really pushing that a lot more, and working with different dance companies or events or performers like since then, and was able to travel. Last summer I was able to tour all summer with Two Rivers Remix Festival.
Oh,
It
awesome.
was so much fun.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, it was wonderful. It was like probably like one of the best summers, especially as a performer. I think it's so important that I take breaks from, like full design like
Mm.
work and just like embody everything. And I do a lot of conceptual work when I'm dancing. Like, sometimes I'll be like, oh, how do I like create harmony in this between this building and this landscape? And then I just do that channeling thing. I like channel like how the building feels. I channel how, it sounds so nerdy, but like channel how the ocean feels, and then like literally work it through with
Yeah.
like movement. So whenever I get to go dance, it's like part of that process for me. But yeah, I went with Two Rivers Remix every second day for 2 weeks straight. We were in a different community. We were up in like Penticton and Lytton. And we're up in, oh my God, we went to so many places. It was just incredible. And at the end of it, I ended up performing at Base Coast, and then just like went straight from there to Base Coast. And it was really, really dry and really hot the whole time. But I was just so proud of myself. I performed every day, 3 times a day, and then went and did like this huge like Base Coast performance with Handsome Tiger.
Mhm.
And then brought like the land back flag out on stage and stuff.
Oh,
And
cool.
yeah, it was so good. It was
Oh.
really fun.
If you Google and watch you dance, actually, you can totally see, because you started when you were so young. So there's some videos of you like when you're really young,
Oh, yeah.
and you can watch you become more connected with your dance over time. I feel like. Would you say that's true?
I think in the
Or would you say it was kind of always inherently there, and then you just kind of like,
I think as a I mean, yeah, I think dance has meant different things for me. But then when I really realized how it's been there for me my whole life, and I really tapped into whatever that is, I think that's when I really sunk into like what I feel like my style is. And that was literally like this last summer, I feel like, when I'm like, oh, I'm not really here. Like, I love performing, I love being on stage, I love the energy of an audience, like I love those things. But I think like that to me is more about being a performer. And at a certain point last year, I realized like I just want to experience things. And I'm so lucky that I have this skill that I can travel with and go to these amazing events and go meet all these amazing people. I can travel the world and like go hang out with different circus people in like, London or, wherever I want to go. There's people that do movement that are often part of community. Like, oh, well, advertise just like this is more about my experience now, and more about really honing on that this is a healing thing for me. And it doesn't always have to be sacred. Like, healing can be messy. Healing can be, angry. Healing can be like anything really. Healing can be vapid sometimes. Like sometimes you're like, you know what, I need a mental break. I'm just gonna like look great. Like that's my goal right now. Like that's fine as long as you're aware of, why you're showing up that way that day. So yeah, I think for me, like, and then also like my queerness, like being more comfortable being public with that and dancing. Understanding fluidity in my dance style too. So I think like when I really was like, oh, this is for me, then I was like, oh, okay, I can have lots of fun with this.
Cool.
Yeah.
When did you start modeling?
Well, my auntie, Pam Baker, literally had me modeling when I was 6.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So OG model.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my auntie's such a like just so incredible. Like Auntie Pam was like the first person to be like, oh, only well, first of all, she's one of the first Indigenous couturiers ever. Like one of the first people doing like, on stage Indigenous fashion.
My boy Rain has no idea what a couturier is.
Well, I guess, I don't know, fancy high fashion.
Cool.
For the sake of that. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. But yeah, she went and learned traditional couture techniques.
Yeah.
So like, in France and, Europe and all of it, they have their fancy, this is what real fashion is.
Okay,
but,
gotcha.
Yeah. Anyway, she went and learned that. She went to the States to different fashion, I believe fashion school down there. And yeah, and then she came back and like really started innovating West Coast contemporary Indigenous fashion.
Yeah.
And then she was really the first person they really have like only Native models on stage, only Native models to represent my clothing.
Cool.
Like she was like, that's how that is. And then like, you know, like how now we're having those conversations, but she was like already there.
Yeah.
And then like most of my family are half Black, half Afro-Indigenous.
Yeah.
So having Afro-Indigenous models on stage from the beginning, like,
wow.
Yeah. So like luckily Native fashion like has that, you know, to like start with.
Yeah.
And then she created a lot of culture confidence camps. And I think my auntie was really integral to like the confidence coming back to our people. And then I am so grateful I got to kind of grow up in that like era of like proud to be Native, at least in our family, and like the influence that she had in the community around us. So like yeah, and then like learning, you know, other Indigenous experiences of like, you know, being like really persecuted for being Indigenous still, like that happens like all the time, right? But like because of what she was doing, the environment she'd put me in, I didn't experience that. I just experienced being proud of being Native from the get-go. And I think that's really like the confidence work she did really shows. And then yeah, and then that was my first time on stage. I'm like 6. I'm like, this is great.
Yeah, totally.
And then I just remember like it was just all my cousins on that stage.
Yeah.
And then I just was like, oh, I'm like surrounded by my family. So I think I've always approached being on stage kind of like that. Like,
Yeah.
oh, this is my people.
You know, I think many non-Indigenous people don't recognize that fashion is kind of inherent to us as like Indigenous people. You know, we had our own fashion, and it really was a sign of self-expression. You know, could you speak more about that? If you
Oh, totally.
go for it.
Yeah, I don't know if you're like remember this, but I did the like decolonize your closet challenge like a couple years ago.
Oh, I don't remember that.
Yeah, so I was getting so frustrated at like Halloween and like cultural appropriation and just Thanksgiving, like all of it, just so frustrated. So like for the month of October, I think this is like 3 or 4 years ago now, I'm every single day I'm just gonna post head to toe wearing Indigenous design and like designers. And luckily again, because my auntie like being really connected to Indigenous designers, I had enough connections to make that happen. I'm like, yeah, at the time, like, where am I going to find Indigenous runners? Like, where am I going to find, like, nobody was really doing any of that, even like a couple years ago. Or like, how do I do like a head to toe look? Like, most of the time before then, it was mostly like, you know, like whatever jacket, but then like the native earrings or like one native thing on the thing. But I'm like, how can I like just fully deck that out? And yeah, I did that whole thing and then realized that inherently what decolonize your closet means doesn't mean just wear Indigenous. It means have a relationship with the people that make your clothes. And I was like, oh, and then I happen to be surrounded by Indigenous creatives. And then I was like, oh, wait, this is relationship building. And I think that point obviously gets missed a lot on social media and when you're just having little sound bites. But for me, that experience of like really trying, like honestly, really hard to like head to toe every day, like for an entire month, like have Indig, I was like, oh, like every now and then I'd be like, oh no, like what do I do? Like these jeans aren't native. I had like would run to my cousin and be like, can you paint these for me? Or like, yeah, or like, can you, you know, collaborate with my other friend on this thing? Or hey, like there's no like Indigenous skincare that I can find. Like auntie, like help me like learn how to make skincare right now, or like, you know, stuff like that. Like, yeah, it's all relationship building, I realized.
Wow.
Yeah.
I actually have never heard of that before. My mind's blown right now.
Yeah, and I think that's what's traditional about it. Like, you know, like back in the day, right? You're like, auntie, like help me. How do I make a buckskin? How do I like having a relationship with the natural world, right? You're just showing your relationship to the world around you all the time.
Yeah.
And then obviously now like it's a lot harder to live a traditional lifestyle. So yeah, maybe I'm not wearing those things, but I am trying to wear what's around me, which is like my cousin made this the other day. I'm not head to toe as much crazy about it like right now, but I am enjoying like that I learned how to that like being in relationship with each other was the most important part of that. And I would love to like, yeah, get back to like fully repping.
Totally.
Yeah.
My mind is running again. However, I think if I had to put a bet on it, that the first completely balanced, like between environmental impact and
clothing design is going to come from an Indigenous designer. I
Mm.
bet money on that.
Mm.
But could you describe your style
Oh.
in 3 to 5 words?
Oh my goodness.
Tops.
Oh no. Oh God. Indigenous baddie on Davie Street.
Okay. And what does that mean?
uh, well, like, the Indigenous baddie vibe is just being like really bougie and like over the top. You're like, I'm just gonna wear all of the shells. I'm just gonna wear all of my jewelry. I'm just gonna rep all of my cousins right now. And then on Davie Street part is just like, hey, like nightlife, gotta wear the all black, gotta have the kind of grunge, like queer aesthetic going on, having the like the claws with the 2 nails that are still filed down. Like, yeah.
We actually have listeners who are very curious about what it means to be queer, what it means to be Two-Spirit. Could you speak a little bit about that?
Totally. I think doing the research in design actually has been really helpful for me. I've been really trying to understand what is queerness, like Coast Salish queerness specifically. I think there's been a lot of really incredible work out of the plains and like different Indigenous cultures, really shining incredible light on like the diversity of queerness in our cultures. And Coast Salish queerness, it's really difficult to get a hold of information on for a lot of reasons. And I guess my journey kind of started with that. Like, I'm like, where do I even begin? Like, who do I talk to? And then, yeah. And then my elder, I was like, oh, like we've lost, lamenting to them, like we've lost our culture, like, da, da, da. They got so angry with me. They're like, we haven't lost anything. Like, where do you think we learned this from? I'm like, what do you mean? And they're like, go to the trees. Like, where do you think we learned about queerness from? Where do you think we learned our language from? Where do you like go to the trees, go to the forest? And I like took them seriously, and I like went, like sat by a tree and was like, what are they talking about? But then I was like, oh, maybe if I like apply my like landscape architect knowledge to this, I'm curious if that'll work. And I did, and I found out that Sḳwx like is Two-Spirit. Cedar is Two-Spirit. They have both genders. And then I was like, wait, I could probably go way further with that. And I was like, oh wait, like all berries are considered in like the English terminology, which isn't perfect, but they're like, oh, they're all bisexual. They all have male, female parts. And then I was like, oh wow, like eelgrass is Two-Spirit. Like, wait. And then I looked into our intertidal creatures. Oysters change genders generally after 2 years, and they can switch genders. Barnacles, which are my favorite, can kind of just, it's all over, like they can kind of change gender whenever, like it's based on need, and they can go back and forth as much as they want. And I was
Really?
like, wow, yeah.
That's
like,
mind-blowing.
Yeah. Like barnacles are wild. Yeah. So barnacles, I'm like, wow, I'm a barnacle person. Like, that's great. Like, so barnacles are like the gender fluid icons in my mind. Obviously, like English and semantics and science are all like convoluted and complicated, but for the purposes of like, that's queer. Like, this is queerness in our territory. And if you think about it, our ancestors have interacted with these beings for like centuries. Obviously, they're going to learn something. Obviously, they're going to understand. Like, I think as it can be really hard being accepted in our own communities. It can be really hard being understood in our own communities. But when the land understands you, you're like, okay, I do belong here. Like, maybe I'm struggling with my relative, or I'm struggling with whoever, but I can go to the ocean and like hang out with the barnacles and
Totally.
be like, we're good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's so cool. I had no idea, to be honest with you. Like my mom is going to University of Alberta. She's studying gender studies, and
Oh, nice.
like every now and then she makes a point to call me, like make sure to educate me as a man. She like gives me a call, and she's like, just so you know, like, and I think this is a pretty good PSA. Like, our languages, like, we actually don't have gender.
Yeah.
At least in Nehia, we don't have gender. Everything is role based or spiritual based or life based. Animate versus inanimate is what the English translation is, right? I think the languages here are the same. Similar?
Yeah.
Different how?
Well, it's hard because, again, like I need to do more research before I can be like, this is concretely, I mean, in general, Indigenous cultures, it's really hard to be like, concretely, this is this.
Yeah.
Because English is just the worst way to translate it.
Yeah.
But from my understanding, everyone.
PSA.
And I'm not a language speaker, but Squamish Nation is my family's traditional language, as well as Hungarian and Kwakwaka'wakw. I'm trying to learn these languages, and also Tlingit. I think in Tlingit, it's just they, them. Nobody quote me on that. But there is very much, that understanding. And then on our Squamish side, my understanding is that pronouns are not gendered in the same way, but it's supernatural and not supernatural. And supernatural beings are like wild woman or Kalkalaith, or supernatural creatures like the Sňwx or the Səsiolt in Kwakwaka'wakw. But also people that are portals for life. That's supernatural. And then like rocks, stones, grandfathers, all these things are like of earth, so not supernatural. And that's the understanding of gender. And then it was explained to me by an elder that in Coast Salish culture, we consider the body like a canoe, and there's a male and female side on a canoe, and it's about the balance of those energies, and that throughout your life you may sway or you may turn or all these things, but ultimately it's about that balance. And in my culture, it was shared with me by Erin Nelson Moody that it's important to cultivate harmony or balance. So I think a Salish way is to try and actually be more balanced than necessarily be very like one way or another. So I think queerness in my culture, you wouldn't necessarily have needed the word.
Yeah.
Because it's already such a expansive understanding of gender already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. What you mentioned that you kind of grew up in your household and your parents were kind of like accepting, kind of knew about your queerness. Like, what was your journey? Like, did you have to come to terms with anything? Like, I don't know. Tell me your story.
Sure. Yeah. I think for me, being bisexual, I knew I was bisexual the soonest.
Yeah.
I think when I was a kid, I think I was just inherently gender fluid, and I think my parents loved that. Like, we were always running around, and suddenly I would just switch, and suddenly my dad and I were like play fighting, and then I'd switch, and then suddenly my dad and I were having tea party and Barbies kind of thing. So it was just like always, my parents were really happy to switch with me, which was really great, and I recognize I'm really, really fortunate for that. But yeah, I think growing up and then interacting more with like society, that's when I think things started getting really rough. Being bisexual and growing up during a time where I think the only real out celebrities was like Megan Fox, and then just the fetishization, the hypersexualization, the hyperfeminization as well, really affected me. And unfortunately ended up in several abusive relationships when I was younger that really enforced a lot of that. And then, like I said, I knew I was bi from, I think, like solidly, I was like, I'm out as bi since I was 16, but I kind of just had a feeling for a while. But yeah, being really out bi, and then being in really heteronormative relationships with really abusive people, getting like, the biphobia, the classic biphobia, being forced into situations I wasn't okay with, like things like this. Really affected me really, really badly. So I have like complex PTSD that I deal with, every day now. But coming to a place of like really honoring my sexuality and realizing that, like moving out of really unsafe spaces, learning how to create safe space for myself, which is really difficult. Safety in a lot of ways isn't, you can't rely on it, but you can do your best to, know what's good for you and not good for you.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
What do you think Indigenous men should know?
Holy.
The reason why I asked that is because, like, and like, just so you know, like, if I trigger you in any way or anything like that, we can shut everything down. Like, I don't give a shit. But I think like one of the things that's like I'll tell you a story. One time I went to a party. This is back in high school. 2 girls are kissing. 2 pairs of dudes start looking at it weird and are like, oh yeah, like blah blah blah, like just kind of got really weird and predatory about it. And I'm like, like I didn't say anything at the time because I didn't know anything.
Mm.
But I think like that is like not your relationship to kind of like interact with at that moment in time unless you're like invited in type of thing.
Totally.
And like I wish I would have said something back in the day, but that actually ended up being a very, very messy situation for one of the guys there, you know? And I feel like one of the things that like I wish I understood sooner myself is that, you know, like you if you had a relationship with every single person in the world, no one of those relationships would be the same with anybody, right? And that's kind of how I view relationships today with everybody, kind of thing. I don't know. What do you think Indigenous men how should we approach the problem? Because I'm so man, you know what I mean?
Well, I appreciate the like the setting the scene too, because I think what you're talking about is, you know, what you know, as a bi person I've experienced a lot. Also being hyper feminized. Like I'm not a woman and being perceived as a woman all the time. But in that context, I think you rightly so. You're like, oh, I kind of wish I said something. Honestly, if everyone can just get better at being like, hey, dude, that's not okay, and just like, because patriarchy is really frustrating. Like as the bi person, like anytime I ever tried to stick up for myself in that situation and be like, hey, this isn't male space right now, and then you know, masculinity, misogyny, patriarchy is like all space is male space. What are you talking about? And then it gets into honestly, it gets back to colonialism like pretty quickly. It's like, oh, what are you talking about? All space is for me. I can take whatever I want. And then when this is only space for feminine energies, for example, there's this weird aggressiveness that happens and this strange entitlement. And I've always wondered and been so confused about that for so long because I'm like, you're not actually attracted to me, the person. You're not actually attracted to these people as individuals. You're actually just interacting in the space as territory. And I'm like, why? Like, that's so bizarre. Like, that's not connective. That's not enjoyable for anyone. Like, nobody's having a good time with that. So, like, what is that? I'm like, oh, that's literally patriarchy. Like, you need to stake a power claim. You need to show people that you have the power dynamic in space so you can continue to control it. So, all you need to do, sorry, that's like really reductive. But essentially, if like other men in that instance can just be like, hey bro, that's not okay, and then just keep that culture, like keep that boundary up, I think that's like really where a lot of shift can happen. But ultimately it needs to happen from education. It needs to happen from, you know, just addressing biphobia. It needs to happen from just addressing you know, like queerphobia, transphobia, all these things. Like it's a way bigger thing. But it's like the amount of times that I would have benefited from somebody just being like, bro, what are you doing?
Yeah.
I think it would have been great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. Hi, my relatives. Do you know how to start a podcast? Because at the beginning of starting Our Storytellers, I did not. One of the things that I've learned is how expensive podcasting can be. So please support us through our Patreon page. If you like what we're doing here, anything helps. You'll get early access to episodes, some exclusive content as well. Again, please support our Patreon page if you can. Thank you so much, Keenan Askaman. Back to our podcast episode.
Yeah. I think because I'm gender fluid, right?
Yeah.
Like when I'm like, for example, today I feel feminine. That's not always the case. Sometimes I feel genderless. Sometimes I feel like a man. And when I feel like a man and I'm presenting like a man, especially when I'm around queer femmes, I often assume like a protective role because I understand that I'm actually in proximity to patriarchy sometimes. Sometimes, so not always. Like queer space, luckily, like really knocks that down.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel for straight guys. Like I don't think a lot of you will ever experience like truly like like non-gendered space. It's so great. Like it's really great. But yeah, like it's just an entire other way of being and like interacting in the world.
Yeah.
But like when I do have to go and interact, or like suddenly I'm the one holding the purses all of a sudden. I'm suddenly the one like making sure the girls are good and like, just being protective. But that's not necessarily because I believe that's, like inherently the man's role or whatever.
Yeah.
But I do see like the need for it when you're in proximity to straightness, when you're in proximity to misogyny. And then often I'm the one that's like, hey bro, that's not okay. And then I'm still perceived as femme, like kind of no matter what I do, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like there is a level of respect there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, that's just masculinity and patriarchy. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Like, why won't you, inherently you're like, oh, I'll just respect that femme doing their thing. I'll respect those women doing their thing. And that's not for me. I'm just gonna be over here doing my thing. Like, that's not the thinking.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I need to go impose on that space. I need
Right.
to go impose on, feminine space. And that gets back to the colonialism and like, like if we think of Mother Earth as Mother Earth, that whole concept, like, Mother Earth, I can take anything I want from it. That energy,
Mm-hmm.
it's just playing out over and over and over and over again. I think until people heal it and like stop that cycle.
Yeah.
But yeah, like ultimately I end up being, in that role and I'm like, bro, like step back or like,
Yeah.
back off. Meanwhile, like I'm still like perceived as feminine.
Yeah.
But then when I do feel feminine, it's like, yeah, it is nice to have people like stick up for me.
Yeah.
And just like make sure space is being held. Yeah.
When I turned 16, like, I had my coming of age ceremony, did my fast, all that different type of stuff. Like, I did receive some teachings, like some protectorship teachings, like protecting a home fire, protecting the lodges, like as a man, and those have definitely helped me in my life, but that comes from our way. You know what I mean? Like that's the balance of like what we're kind of going for. So in general, what do you think Indigenous men should know today?
That you're far closer to queerness than you are straightness. That straightness is made up. It's colonial. The reason why the gender binary was created was to define what civilization is, so that white people could define themselves as civilized and Black, Indigenous people, cultured people with culture, why they're not as civilized. And that reason is that explorers would show up on our shores. They'd see, all the men have long hair. We're all wearing earrings. We all look fucking beautiful. We've all got cheekbones, like all the rest of it. And we don't look that different from each other. Like they don't know like the full intricacies, none of that. But on first glance, they don't look that different. They're all wearing skirts. They're all wearing dresses.
Yeah.
Like, and then so they're like, oh, if we can just define men and women as differently as we possibly can make them when we show up on, shores of people with culture, then we'll define them as savages. Because civilization is defined by the gender binary and savagery is defined by more fluidity.
Wow.
Yeah.
My mind is freaking blown right now, just so you know.
Yeah.
My mom actually told me something about that too. She said like, why do you wear skirts in ceremony? Why do you grow your hair long? All that different type of stuff. And wow, I'm feeling educated today, so I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's so much easier to be queer than it is to be straight. No, just think about it. Like how, like a man's way of life is so uncomfortable. You're like, I gotta be that, and I gotta be like ready, and I gotta be all these things, and I gotta like wear the pants and wear the suit and wear the that. Like it's just so like it's like just uncomfortable. Whereas like like our traditional regalia is like comfortable. You can move in it. You can fight in it. You can do what you need to do in it. And like we all just kind of were in what we needed to be the most comfortable and like interact in our way of life in a good way. And then white people came in and like assimilated like their assimilation projects so that we would seem different from each other. And it like wasn't really about that originally.
Totally. And I think that like if I had to take like extremely like boy perspective on everything, like there's like one thing to be said about like what we call, I don't know, maybe there's a freaking better word for this, but I'm sure there is. Now that I think about it, I was going to go to the brotherhood route, but after learning what you just taught me.
But just don't crack your brain just yet.
I'm cracked.
Go where you need to go.
But what I was going to say is like, there is a part about, for me anyway, like being a Métis man that is like very rewarding in some way. Like I really do love like the teaching of like providing for your community, providing for your home fire. Like that gives me a very, very big sense of pride.
Mm.
And I really love that. And I think that if our Indigenous men really reconnected with that one teaching, it would kind of help us strike a balance between everything, to be honest with you. But especially like this like colonial perspective on gender and stuff like that too. That's what I was trying to say.
No, totally. I think pride is really important to who we are, and like reclaiming our roles is so important. I think like my role in that context, and more as a two-spirit person, is like being involved in ceremony, being involved in like my role as someone that's two-spirit. I can be a man, I can be a woman sometimes. I can be more fluid, I can be a channeler, I can be all these things. My role is far more about like balance, I think. And like every now and then, I'll come in and understand the protection and all those things.
Yeah.
But there's so many different ways to protect that aren't always like
like physical
so, like,
beef man.
Yeah.
Like I always call myself a meathead style.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's just, all these concepts. I think it's important, you latch on to what you need to do what you need to do for your people that you love. But at the same time, like really investigate what does protection mean, right? And I think in my language it's Sďwx, protect. And I've been using the concept of protection to bring it back to design as a way of designing. Like traditionally our people had a protected back, and then we're always had an open pathway to water to travel wherever we needed to. So I'm like, as I can protect through the way that I build space, I can protect through the way that I build community, I can protect through sticking up for the femmes in my life, and trans women in my life, or trans people in my life. And protection can even just be like the inner work that I need to do to like undo misogyny in myself, or undo colonialism in myself, so that I'm showing up as not as a harmful person anymore, or to the best, to what I can do. I think positionality is really, really important. Like if you're going to be the kind of man that's like, I'm the great provider and protector and like all the rest of it, you need to understand who you are in space when you hold that, and how that affects, women around you, how that affects queer people around you. If you really want to be that, you can be that, but just be aware of how that's affecting people around you. Are you really actually protecting people around you when you're holding that energy?
Right.
If you are, cool, great, good for you. Like you've assessed it, that, amazing. But it's like, I'm a protector, but you're actually like, your emotional energy is everywhere. Your ego is everywhere.
Right.
Like, is that really when it's hurting people around you, but you're like, I'm, like it's not true. Like it's not true.
Yeah.
That's not protecting, right? That's protecting the ego, not protecting your people.
Wow. I'm loving this right now. I'm having a great time.
Yeah. Let's unpack masculinity.
Let's to build off of that, you mentioned ceremony in the middle of all that. What does ceremony mean to you?
Well, relationship with the spirit world, ultimately for me. I think, literally, just a relationship with the spirit world, relationship with the spirits and the ancestors, definitely. And then I think ceremony and culture create these really incredible, intricate, and sometimes very simple ways of doing that in a good way as well. Yeah.
What do you want Indigenous peoples in our generation start actioning today?
Ooh, your sovereignty. Yeah, like inner embodied sovereignty. I know that's so hard for our people, because that's just literally exactly what colonialism doesn't want. So every road you turn is, convincing you otherwise. But ultimately, like the journey of like, your self-sovereignty, your self-agency, your power, right? And just like, like how powerful we are all together when we're like that, when we're supporting each other's agency.
What's a actionable step that someone can take to achieve that?
I guess there's so many routes to personal power. It's like personal, like, what works for you or whatever you're going through. But for me, obviously like dancing has really helped me embody healing. I think embodying things is really, really important. You can go to a therapist and talk and, do what you need to do and talk to your elders, be in ceremony. Being in ceremony, I think, really helps with that somatic aspect. But if you can't have access to ceremony, like what else can you do? How can you process that with your body? How can you move that pain through your body? How can your mind and your body work together instead of like hurting each other? Yeah. And then ultimately that'll hopefully help you when you actually have to deal with, that one white person that's just grinding your gears.
Yeah. What's next for you?
Dinner. I don't know. I really feel like I'm on the path I've been trying to be on. So it's really just like keeping doing the work. And then just again, like I'm focused so much on embodying. Like I'm trying so hard to just be like, wow, this is a lot. It's a lot that we're doing. It's a lot that needs to be done. How can when I go home, like make sure that I'm mentally good so that tomorrow I can like do all that again. And every now and then that I crash, I'm like, okay, I got to take a week off now. Like I don't want to show up and talk to an elder and it's like, and I'm in an energetically bad space. So really for me, it's just been a lot of like personal wellness has been what I've been focusing on lately.
What's your wellness routine?
Oh God. Hold on. Wellness routine. I have a really hard time sticking to a routine.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very much
Me too.
I'm a night person. I'm What
are your wellness activities?
Wellness activities. Okay. Dancing, cleanse, like spirit baths, going to the ocean, being in nature. I love how that's an answer all the time. I know it's really hard to be in nature a lot when you live in a city, like, especially when you don't have a car. Dancing, meditate. I don't know. It just sounds so like I just like to be present as much as I can.
Hey, it's a skill.
Yeah.
I'm terrible at it. Is there anyone you'd like to dedicate this podcast to?
Oh, my dad. I talked about him the whole time. Yeah, Wade Baker.
Wade Baker. Is there anyone that should be on the podcast?
My dad.
Your dad, Wade Baker.
Yeah. I think it'd be really nice to see, like trans people on the podcast. Really thinking about like who we need to center in our communities.
Totally.
Yeah, just queerness in general.
Sure. I'll talk to anybody. Any recommendations? It's like not even my podcast. It's your podcast.
Nice. Anyways, so
Sierra, thank you so much for coming today, and I appreciate it so much. Do you have anything left to say?
Just Jen Quinlan Tomi, I thank you. This has been really enjoyable, and I'm really grateful I got to talk about dance and things that I haven't been able to chat about professionally in forever. And just reminding myself even that like play is so important and joy. So thank you.
Let's go get some dinner.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening to today's podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as per usual, as much as I did. If you have any feedback, please leave a comment, like, subscribe, do all that type of stuff. We've had some very awesome growth here lately, so I really, really appreciate everybody tuning in. I hope you all have a great week. I'm thankful for every single one of you. All my relations, Riel.